October 8th, 1871. A night that should have been like any other, but instead, two towns, hundreds of miles apart, were about to face hell on earth. In one night, two of the deadliest fires in American history tore through communities, leaving thousands dead and lives changed forever. One of these fires, the Great Chicago Fire, became infamous. But on that same night, in a small Wisconsin town named Peshtigo, an even deadlier firestorm erupted. A fire so intense that it melted sand into glass and twisted solid iron. A fire so fierce that entire families, animals, and homes were consumed in minutes. Yet few people today even know it happened. This is the story of one night, two fires, and one forgotten tragedy. In the years leading up to that fateful night, both Chicago and Peshtigo were bustling, growing communities. Chicago, a city of nearly 325,000 people, was booming. Its location on the shores of Lake Michigan made it a thriving hub for commerce and industry. Immigrants from around the world were pouring into the city, helping build it into a metropolis where buildings stretched upwards and progress seemed unstoppable. But Chicago was vulnerable. Its buildings, sidewalks, and even some of their streets were all made of wood, dry, brittle, and just waiting for a spark. The city had seen an unusually hot, dry summer. By October, it had received only 1 inch of rain. Peshtigo, a small logging town in northern Wisconsin, had a different kind of energy. It was home to about 1,700 people. The surrounding forests were thick and rich with timber, feeding a growing logging industry that provided livelihoods to the town's residents. There were massive areas of pine, oak, maple, and cedar that were an immense resource to the rapid development that was happening all around the area. Slash and burn land management was a common practice. This is where loggers would cut down brush, leave it to dry, and then burn it. This not only cleared the land for farming, but it also left a nutrient-rich layer of ash, making the soil fertile. It was efficient but dangerous, especially in the dry heat of 1871. For months, the people of Peshtigo had watched smoke on the horizon. These fires were nothing new, but there started to become an unease in the air. The land was parched, the air was hot, and every breeze seemed like a threat. Little did they know, a storm was coming. Weather records show that an intense low-pressure system was brewing over the Central Plains. This would result in strong southwesterly winds to whip across the region, perfect fuel for the hell that was on its way. It was Sunday evening, October 8th, 1871. Families in Peshtigo were settling in after a long day. Chicagoans were enjoying a typical Sunday evening, unaware that within hours the city would be reduced to smoldering ruins. Around 8:30 p.m. in a quiet corner of Chicago, at 855 West DeKoven Street to be exact, Mrs.Oleary was out in the barn milking her cow. A loud noise spooked the cow, and it kicked over the kerosene lantern that Mrs.Oleary was using to illuminate the barn. Within seconds, the flames were out of control. A simple lantern and a spooked cow led to one of the worst disasters in American history. Or did it? That's the story that immediately spread through the town. However, later you will see that that might not be the case. Chicago's fire department had 185 firefighters with 17 horse-drawn steam pumpers. These were immediately dispatched by watchman Matthias Schaefer to extinguish the fire. However, he mistakenly sent the firefighters to the wrong location. At the same time, over 200 miles north in Wisconsin, Peshtigo was about to be hit by something even more terrifying, a firestorm. The cold front blasted in from the west and collided with the hot, dry conditions in northern Wisconsin, creating intense winds that fanned the flames of the small slash-and-burn logging fires that were already burning. The people of Peshtigo had no idea what was coming. It was dark out, and one by one, the lanterns that illuminated their humble, cozy homes were extinguished as mothers laid their babies to sleep. There was an ominous deep red glow near the horizon looking west. Then a low rumbling noise began to get louder and louder. It sounded like train cars getting closer and closer. The men of the town rushed outside to see what was going on, and to their horror saw the intense inferno coming towards the town at an alarming speed. Mothers snatched up their children from bed, quickly packed some food and water and any valuables that were in arm's reach, and ran out to meet their husbands who were getting the horses ready. It was now 10 o'clock p.m., and burning coals were dropping from the sky, instantly igniting any structure they landed on. The fire exploded and cut off all escape routes so fast that the only chance for survival was to jump into the town's water wells or the Peshtigo River. Those who couldn't swim either drowned in the cold water or succumbed to the flames on the bank of the river. One 13-year-old girl clung to the horns of a cow all night in the river just to survive. There is one heartbreaking account of a desperate father having to make the agonizing decision to take his children's lives by his own hand, just to save them from the horrific fate that awaited them in the flames. Survivors would later describe the fire as a tornado of flames, with winds reaching 110 miles per hour and temperatures soaring to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Houses, rail cars, even entire trees were lifted into the air like toys. Flames shot hundreds of feet into the sky, raining burning embers on the helpless town below. In about 30 minutes, the entire town was gone. By the time the fire burned itself out, well over 1,200 people were dead, though some estimates put the death toll as high as 2,500. 5 times as many that are about to perish in the fire that is beginning to engulf Chicago. By the time the Chicago firefighters arrived at the correct location at Mrs.Oleary's barn, it was too late. The fire had already spread to neighboring buildings and had no intention of stopping. Chicago's wooden buildings, sidewalks, and streets stood no chance. Strong winds whipped through the city, encouraging the flames to leap from building to building, consuming everything in its path. Just like in Peshtigo, embers were raining from the sky, igniting anything they landed on. One of the embers landed on the city's waterworks building and instantly engulfed it with flames. This incapacitated the water mains and left the firefighters helpless, so they had to watch their entire city go up in flames. Residents fled to the streets with nothing but the clothes on their backs, hoping to outrun the flames. Finally, rain began to fall late on October 9th, but by then the death and destruction had already occurred. Sadly, 300 people would lose their lives that night, and the majority of Chicago was nothing but ashes. When dawn broke over Chicago and Peshtigo on October 10th, both towns were unrecognizable. The fires had reduced entire communities to ash. Chicago in ruins had lost 300 people and 17,000 structures, leaving more than 100,000 people homeless. Yet within days, relief poured in from all around the world. Money, supplies, and aid arrived to help the city rebuild. Just the day after the fire was extinguished, wood was already being delivered to rebuild. But in Peshtigo, it was a different story. With most of the attention focused on the tragedy in Chicago, the small Wisconsin town was largely forgotten. Aid came too late for many. Families were buried in mass graves, their names lost to history. Peshtigo was never the same. The woodenware factory that had been the town's economic backbone never reopened, marking the end of its booming lumber industry. As Chicago rebuilt, rumors swirled about who was to blame for the fire. The O'Leary family was the easy target, even though no definitive proof linked them to the fire and they were never charged. The damage to their reputation had already been done. Mrs. Oleary went to her grave denying she had anything to do with it. Later, a reporter from the Chicago Tribune admitted to fabricating the story. It wasn't until 1997 that the Chicago City Council officially exonerated the O'Learys. So who was to blame? Well, there were many stories, from men gambling in the barn who knocked over a lantern, to a meteor shower, to speculation that it just started from embers that fell from the other small fires in the area. But the most interesting story of them all suggests that a fellow named Lewis M. Cohn may have started it during a game of craps. Following his death in 1942, he donated $35,000 to Northwestern University. The dedication from Cohn claimed that he was present at the start of the fire. According to Cohn, on the night of the fire, he was gambling in the O'Leary's barn with one of their sons and some neighbor boys. When Mr. O'Leary came out to chase them away, they accidentally knocked over a lantern. Kind of sounds like a deathbed confession to me, although we will never truly know what happened. In 1956, the remaining structures of the O'Leary property at 558 West DeKoven Street were torn down to construct the Chicago Fire Academy. To memorialize the horrific event, a bronze statue of flames was erected right on the spot where the fire is said to have originated. In Peshtigo, however, there was no one person to blame, just a perfect cocktail of extreme weather and a forest as dry as a tinderbox. Although there is one rumor that railroad workers accidentally started a small brush fire that got out of control when the high winds arrived, but that is not being confirmed. William Butler Ogden, a wealthy lumber baron, personally went to Peshtigo and spearheaded the rebuilding efforts, but it was slow and many of the businesses never reopened. Today, Peshtigo is a small, quiet town with a population of about 3,500 people. Here you will find the Peshtigo Fire Museum, which was once the building of the St. Mary's Church. The church was nearly complete in the fall of 1871, but was burned to the ground in the fire. It was then rebuilt in 1872, but sadly burned again and was rebuilt in 1927. Finally, in 1960, the decision was made to convert the church into the Peshtigo Fire Museum. Here you will find a collection of artifacts, first-hand accounts, and a graveyard with a mass grave of 350 bodies. Today, the Great Chicago Fire is memorialized in history books, while the Peshtigo Fire, that was on the same night, remains largely forgotten. But the truth is, the Peshtigo Fire was the deadliest wildfire in recorded history, claiming more lives than any other fire before or since. The city is now known as the City Rebuilt from Ashes. Each year on October 8th, as the anniversary of the Great Chicago Fire hits the headlines, please also remember the suffering and stories of the people of Peshtigo, as the loss of life in that area was unimaginable. If you enjoy unpacking the past, check out this next video. How could molasses, a simple ingredient that is in your gingerbread cookies, create the most bizarre disaster in America's history? Click to find out. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you found this video informative and entertaining.